My name is Carrie Morrow. I was a 40-year producer in Hollywood, TV and films. Big ones like you've heard of. Wedding Planner, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, The Kevin Hart Show, Shining Vale, Games People Play, on and on and on and on. Don't be a menace to South Central while drinking your juice in the hood. I was a real producer, and it's kind of come to a grinding halt with Hollywood really evaporating, and life has a way of changing my plans, the ones I never planned to change. We're looking down the hole of a pile of wreckage that I don't recognize. Please listen to my podcast, What the Heck Next, and you're going to learn a lot about Hollywood. This episode, I'm telling some dirty secrets. Hollywood dirty secrets. You're going to enjoy it. I look forward to seeing what you have to say about it. Please comment on it and let me know. Let's get into those stories. My name is Carrie Morrow, and this is Chaya. This is my podcast, What the Heck Next? Started out as a podcast talking about my 40 years of producing in Hollywood, and now it's kind of evolved. People have asked me to tell some Hollywood stories. So here's some of the interesting things you have to understand. When a producer signs on to a project, we are obligated to sign an NDA, which is a non-disclosure agreement. With that contract comes professionalism of really not talking about really much about the project, not necessarily about the story, but sometimes it's about, hyper secrecy around the story. But most times it's about things that have gone on that they just don't want out there in the world. It's my job to keep the lid on the pot and make sure that rumors and stuff don't boil over, because believe me, there's plenty of them. I can't be specific because I have signed these contracts for years, over decades of what I witnessed, what I experienced, what I went through on many movies. So without being specific, I can tell you about certain things, like the time that I was so sexually harassed. And no, it wasn't Harvey Weinstein. It was somebody else just as famous, who I would come into my trailer, and every production I would have my own trailer, because I would sit, I had to do all the work, sign all the papers and time cards, payments that I had to take care of. And I was so nonstop sexually harassed. And I thought it was just me, but you want to know, I was not humiliated. I was so frustrated that I couldn't stop it, that I would come into my trailer, bouncing off the set and coming back to my little room where I was busy doing all my paperwork and stuff. This producer would be in my trailer with no pants, literally no pants. And I said to him on many occasions, if you don't put your pants on, I'm going to scream rape. He'd laugh and he'd chuckle and he'd giggle and think it was so funny. And all that I thought of was that I'm going to lose my job. That was all. I'll never work again in Hollywood. This was something that was like my fault. I wasn't interested in him, and it was in the early 90s, and I was frozen. I could not do anything about it. I didn't know who to tell or what to do about it, but it didn't stop, to the point where he was inappropriate with himself in front of me. This went on for an entire production, even to the point where one night he followed me home. And he was standing there in my driveway going, come on, like, give me a shot here. I didn't want anything to do with him. Really. And not that he wasn't a good looking guy or nice. I didn't want anything to do with him because I was afraid I would lose my job. And by the way, I was working for only men, not all men, only men. Even at the studio level, it was only men. I was the only woman. And I just thought it was best just to push him off and just keep going. And it wasn't just in my trailer. It just didn't matter where I was going. He'd come up behind me at the craft service table, and this just went on and on and on for the entire production. The only way I realized many years later, probably not 20, maybe 20 years later, I was home and I was watching a daytime talk show. There on that daytime talk show were two of the actresses from that movie that I was on, saying that he raped them. Well, I didn't have that experience. This like light bulb went on. All of a sudden, all these other stories about this guy started to come out, that he had a history of this. And I just was shocked that one of the girls said that she was drugged. She really liked him. She went back to his apartment, and I didn't have any of those problems. Did not have any of those problems. Was not even interested in getting near that situation. I realized that that was not a good situation. But back then, we were talking about 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, the conversation was not public. These things were not discussed. And at the same time, I did a movie where it was kind of a thriller. And the star of the movie was in a scene where he takes the female actress and he takes her up against the side of a car, and we rehearsed it. I saw what was going to happen, and it's kind of passionate and it's sweet. She doesn't realize that he's a killer making a pass for her, and she's very pretty and he's really cute. And so we go to shoot that. We had rehearsed it, so I knew just what was going to happen. And there we were in the middle of nowhere. They yell action, and they get out of the car, and the woman comes around the car, and he lifts her and puts her against the car. And then he takes her dress off, and then he puts her on the hood of the car. Not rehearsed. We did not. And I'm looking and seeing if the director is going to do something about this. How far is this going to go? He proceeds to climb on top of her on the hood of a car in front of 80 people while we're shooting this scene. No joke. They had on camera sex, full board in front of all of us. And no, this was not an adult film. This was a regular, let's call it a movie of the week. I looked at the director and I was like, cut. You need to cut. Cut this. Cut it. Cut. He smiled at me. He said, no, I'm not cutting it. And I said, no, 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 seriously. Seriously, we're going to all lose our jobs. He said, I'll cut. I'll cut when he's finished. When he's finished with her. Do you know that we sat there watching him with this little bottom going in and out of her? And then he was finished. And there we were, all of us with our mouths hanging open. This went on for minutes, which, by the way, back then it was film. It wasn't digital. So they had to reload the camera while this was all happening. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So when you want to know what goes on in Hollywood, there's a lot of stories like that. I had an assistant who was gay many years ago, and he had a boyfriend, husband, partner who was a very successful actor, but nobody knew he was gay, the partner. He was on a show, and the lead actress on that show was so in love with him that she kept kind of harassing him. Like, why don't you like me? Aren't I attractive enough to you? Why don't you want me? Well, finally, one day they had a love scene, and she came to bed in the love scene. And by the way, this is on a set with tons of people. And the director yells action. And, to the viewer, because they're wearing garments, I had on my podcast an intimacy coordinator who talks about all of the precautions and the things that are set up to protect the actor so these things don't happen. And the actor climbs on top of her and she whispers to him, "Put it in." What he really raised his hand to the director, stopped the camera, and he went off to his dressing room, and he had to really compose himself because this woman was falling in love with him. And by the way, that happens a lot on movie sets. These actors spend a lot of intimate time together and they get these feelings. And listen, we saw it with, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie while he was married to somebody else. This happens a lot. And it's not unusual. It's okay. That's how they met and that's how they came to be a couple. It's understandable, but it's not always understandable for everybody. Some people do not want that advance. What are they supposed to do about it? So she came running down the hallway, screaming and crying, "Why don't you like me? Why aren't you attracted to me?" Not knowing that he was gay. And he finally had to tell her. And this was back in a time when gay male actors were not out of the closet. She was so relieved, but look at how that got carried away. And I have a lot of stories like that you find yourself in these situations and you really can't talk about them. I did a movie where the producer, very successful producer, was married with children. We were on location, which, by the way, is very common. Years ago, we would be off making movies in the middle of nowhere. It could be in the middle of Utah or the middle of Northern California, in the woods, in the mountains, in the wherever. But your family wasn't with you. And I did a movie in the Bahamas, in Eleuthera. There were no spouses anywhere. And I did a movie. I had to go for a few days back to New York. But when I came back to the set, which was on location, there was somebody very young sitting at my desk. There she was, Megan, sitting at my desk. And I was like, "Who are you?" And she goes, "Oh, my boyfriend told me that you would teach me how to do your job." And I'm like, "Who's your boyfriend?" And she tells me it's the producer of the movie. And I'm thinking, wait a second. I've met his wife and his children. I've been to his house. That's your boyfriend? Yes. So I went to him and I said, "What is going on here? Seriously." And he's like, "Don't say anything. Don't say anything to my wife. Don't say anything." I said, "I'm not teaching your girlfriend how to do my job so that next movie you don't need me." And footnote, part 2, they actually ended up together. The wife found out, he left the wife, and he stayed with her for years. I heard later on in life they broke up, but he was a very famous producer. And things happen on movie sets that nobody talks about. We just all kind of look the other way. I did a movie years ago for Joel. He had an assistant that he loved, that he was with him for 20 years. He was really more of his buddy than he was really a producer. He turned this guy into a producer, and I got a movie that I was doing for Joel. The buddy, he didn't really he had more call girls that showed up to visit with him in these big white limousines. They would show up and he'd be in the hotel with them most of the time, and I'd be producing, and he'd say, "If you need anything, let me know." In the meantime, that movie was over. We came back to LA, and I do not know what went south with their relationship. His entire world. He had worked for Joel for 25 years. And now it was falling apart because he wasn't really a producer, but Joel made him a producer, and Alan just really didn't fit in anymore and clearly wasn't a producer, and Joel wasn't going to hire him anymore, and he let him go. But Alan became so incensed that Joel tossed him aside after decades of taking care of him and being there for him. And in the meantime, he started to write letters saying, please, can I have your time of day? Can I talk to you? This was in the late 90s. Alan could not let go. Now we're around the early 2000s, and Alan is losing his mind. He couldn't find another job. There was no more producing, and he was washed up. And he wrote a letter to Joel, and he gave it to one of Joel's executives, and the guy came back to Alan and said, he's not going to read the letter. Just you got to get on with your life, buddy. You just got to get on with your life. And Alan could not accept that. So back then, when you could send later on AOL, emails that said send later, not send now, and you could pick like in 15 minutes or an hour, whenever you wanted to send later. And he wrote a note to Joel and to this executive and send later. He printed out the email, he taped it on his bathroom door, and then he ended things for himself. And that was one of the most gut-wrenching moments in my Hollywood journey, because I realized this is not a joke. People would die for what we do and die if they couldn't do it. And that was an earth-shaking moment when Joel called me. I was actually in New York in 2005 in the summer, and he said to me, how did this happen? Why? And I said, he wrote to you. You didn't want to hear from him. And those are the kind of serious level stories that I have lived with. And there's many more details to those kind of stories that I had to live with. Once I did a movie, there was a scene with exotic dancers, and he wanted me to get the most beautiful naked women I could find. And I understood that. So there was an agency back then that would hire those kind of beautiful naked women to dance in a scene in a movie, at a party, or barely dressed. When I showed the photos, oh my God, he was so mad at me. He's like, that's not what I want, Carrie. I want girls with tits, big tits. Oh my gosh. Well, I was shocked. Then I had to go for the first time in my life to LA Live Nudes downtown Los Angeles and pick out LA Live Nudes to be in my movie. I thought to myself, this is the big producing career. I'm out asking women, how big are you? Like, what do you look like with no clothes on? There you go. There's the glamorous producing job that I had. It's been an interesting journey, but a lot of stories like that a lot of them that we can't even really talk about or tell in detail because of our NDA. And I honored it and I respected it. And I have faced unthinkable amounts of great times and unbelievable and doing things and going on helicopters and Bradley tanks and ships out in the ocean. We shot on a cruise ship once and take jet skis to work. Those are the glamorous things caught up with the times where I was on movies and they ran out of money. And I was in charge of the money, and I'd be like, there's no money in the bank. There's no money in the bank to make payroll. What am I going to tell everybody? These are real Hollywood stories. I want people to get an understanding of what I did for 40 years in Hollywood. I was in the DGA. I've been in the Directors Guild of America since 1993. I have worked with the biggest, the most important, and I have seen things that you just would never believe. I know it all makes my career very interesting and very colorful. I like to share the pieces that are part of my Hollywood dirty secrets. I hope you enjoyed some of my crazy tales. I'll tell you more. I really appreciate it. Right now, I don't think Hollywood's coming back, and this is the pivot moment for me and my friends too. And what do you do after you've spent, no joke, decades, 4 decades in this town doing this job? I have a lot to tell, and I'm so grateful for everything I went through, even the really uncomfortable times. I want to share them with you. So please, please like, follow, subscribe, hit that subscribe button. This is What the Heck Next. It's about life having a way of changing our plans, the ones we never planned to change. I planned on doing this forever, but forever didn't plan for me to do it. So right now, I'm picking up my pieces, trying to figure out what to do next. But right now, I'm going to enjoy telling you some of the tales of my journey because it's really kind of fun. Thank you so much for listening to me. I really appreciate it. This is What the Heck Next. I'm Carrie Morrow, grateful for you. As I like to say to my son, go out and do great things.